Welcome, everyone. I have one eye on the chat box, so definitely feel free to use that. If you're doing something else in the background, it's totally okay. People have sort of stopped trickling in, so I'll start. Good afternoon. Thank you for taking the time out today to attend the session on identifying, and I'll add, articulating your transferable skills in preparation for this Hop to the Future recruitment and networking event, and more importantly, beyond. So last year was the first year that we put this event together, and while students and postdocs found the interaction with the employers and connections that came through the post event very helpful, they especially found the prep sessions impactful. So this time I wanted to add more topics driven by what you indicated would be helpful. And from experience, what I hear could be helpful in my one-on-one consultations with you all. For those who don't know me, because we have folks from across the university here today. My name is Roshni, and I run the PHutures office that serves PhDs and postdocs on most days, the Homewood School. But on these big events, East Baltimore friends are welcome, and I will serve you as well. So welcome everyone who's on East Baltimore, and we haven't met yet. So my PhD is actually aligned to East Baltimore folks. It's in immunology, and my postdoc was at the US Food and Drug Administration. And I pivoted using my transferable skills to move into a career in, well, careers and higher ed. So often in my talks, my drop-ins and exercises, I am reflecting on my experiences just a couple of years ahead of where you might be. So I want to say, I get it. Most of my learnings of what skills I have came to me in my last year or two of my postdoc. And every day I seem to be learning more things about myself, what I'm good at, and what I like. So let's just dive right into the session after this sort of brief introduction. And I wanted to begin today by reflecting on the value of a PhD. So opinions certainly vary about whether a PhD is worth it or not. Certainly, I can understand why some disciplines would have these debates over some others. Many of us here today perhaps have looked at our friends, family who do not have PhDs and are doing great without it. You know, they're earning good salaries, they're being promoted in their jobs, they have a 9 to 5, and you know, PhD is probably not even needed for those positions. It often comes up in my own family sort of WhatsApp jokes, you know, the usual, like my brother who has a master's, you know, he's just got promoted for the 4th time in a year, and you know, we're always questioning it. And I'm sure, having gone through the process and sort of navigating jobs in this career space, you can also attest to having those questions. But the other thing that I can attest to, having gone through the process, is there's definitely immense value of in a PhD. Without going into some of the debatable and philosophical aspects, let's reimagine what it looks like to be an academic, scientist, engineer, humanist with a PhD, and what sort of value we may bring to the table. So at the core of it all, we can figure stuff out. Someone said, curiosity is the fuel for discovery, inquiry, and learning. And being curious is literally in the job description of a PhD. So that's one part of it. We can figure stuff out. Not so many people in this world spend this much time becoming good at one particular thing, and that makes them an expert in a particular area, and this is desirable to others. We tend to be able to develop these technical skills like R or Python or nanomaterials, fuel cell chemistry, cell culture, and microscopy. And to employers, that's the value proposition in that certain set of skills. For the most part, STEM PhDs interact and work together with a cross section of folks who are either inexperienced, maybe undergrads or a summer student, to a staff scientist, to your PIs, experienced folks. So we were able to work in these like cross-functional, diverse fields. And PhDs, they tend to open certain doors in certain career paths. So we possess skills additionally that translate beyond our scholarly identities and boundaries. And I want to emphasize that that's a good thing because it makes us more versatile. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. We're trying to understand what are those qualities or these translational skills that make us more competitive and versatile. I forgot to cue in Liam Neeson here with the particular set of skills. quote, if you've seen the movie Taken, that's what we pretty much do. So many of you are aware of this definition already. A transferable skill is a skill you may have used in one work context that you can now use in a different work context. And the first work context we're referring to right now might be our graduate postdoc careers. And the next work context is probably in government or industry or tech or whatnot. Context matters because depending on where you are and how you plan to use your PhD expertise, your transferable skills might change. What do I mean by that? I think this will become more evident as we move through our conversation. Let's start with data. And speaking of conversation, again, please interact with me. So I'm not talking about, I'm talking to myself in the chat box. So in preparation for this event, one of the questions we asked you all was, how likely are you to look for a job outside of academia? And this is the answer, with 5 being very likely and 1 being not very likely. It is quite apparent, this is my experience even beyond this event, 377 of you sort of filled out the survey. It's my experience that most likely, most of you are looking for positions in tech, biotech, education, consulting, government research, policy, sustainability careers, and postdocs maybe in industry or at a hospital, somewhere like St. Jude's, for example, right? Also, when we asked you to identify your top 3 transferable skills, a majority of you picked these 3 skills. It was like really vast. Out of 377 of you, 300 tended to pick critical thinking and problem solving, teamwork and collaboration, and analytical and quantitative skills as what you ranked as your top skills. And then what was lower ranked in this whole process was relationship building, time management, communication, and creativity and innovation. Now, when we look at that second column of what was lower ranked, it's very likely that you might also be good at relationship building, but we only asked you to rank your top 3. It's also likely that you're indeed still developing some of these skills, right? We don't just have these skills automatically, we develop them over time. It's also likely that you don't quite know if and how you may already possess these skills. So here's what I'm here to showcase to you is let's find out together and uncover those hidden skills. And most importantly, how does that relate to what these recruiters and hiring managers want to see when we apply and when we interview for these jobs? Speaking of employers, we also, when we were trying to recruit employers to this event, asked the employers, what do you want to see? What are your most valuable skills that you're looking for in a candidate? Almost like the top 3 answers, guess what they were? It's on the left-hand side. It exactly matched what you claimed was your top 3, which was critical thinking, teamwork, and collaboration, and analytical. However, the employers, if like 59 of the employers said critical thinking and problem solving, 59 also picked, we didn't give them the option of top 3, we gave them an option to pick all the valuable skills. They also said they are looking to see from you all communication, creativity and innovation, time management, and relationship building, which were the lower ranked skills that you all identified yourselves. Why? Because outside of the academic setting, your transferable skills beyond what we typically do in our PhD carry equal and if not more weightage depending on the field. So articulating how you might have this is important because you're only telling employers in your job application materials and in your conversations and interviews that you have these top 3 skills and not portraying how you may have these other skills that they value, then you might as well just be 2 ships passing in the night sky. And what that means is in your career, in career talk, your resume may not be selected from a bunch. That doesn't lead to an interview, or an interview may not hit the mark. So and I've learned this the hard way, going through applications, getting rejected, learning from those mistakes, is that we have to make this connection for them. They are not automatically going to know when you're applying, even for a postdoc position in academia, they're not automatically going to know what you bring to the table unless we are articulating, portraying that, and unless they know us already somehow. So I'm going to bring this slide back. We said in the beginning, the value of a PhD is if we can figure stuff out. We spend an incredible amount of time becoming experts at something, and we possess a set of specific technical skills. that falls under that three categories, which is great news because PhDs, obviously the critical thinking, teamwork, and analytical qualities are very much desirable. But I want to re-emphasize that we do possess these other skills, communication, creativity, innovation, that can translate beyond these scholarly boundaries. And I want to say that this is a good thing. Okay, it's not a bad thing to have these like other skills as well. And bringing back this slide, if majority are sort of leaning to move outside of academia, then we're going to find a way to combine these skills in our job application materials and crafting our professional narrative, maybe in our LinkedIn sort of profiles and our headlines. We want to find a way to craft this and communicate that to the employer. So these are the skills that we asked in the survey. There are other sort of translational and transferable skills that you might have that's not included here. It could be organization, research, strategic planning. Maybe you have an entrepreneurial spirit. Maybe you started a company in grad school. Professionalism. These are other skills that are valued. In fact, there's a professional society, I don't know if you've heard of it, called the National Association of Colleges and Employers, NACE. And they're basically the leading source of information on basically college student career readiness and employment. And they had very recently conducted a study and found out that there are 8 competencies for a career-ready workforce. And you can see here, and I'll send you this link and this PDF, it's brilliant, the resources that the 8 competencies that they share. And this includes technology, equity and inclusion, critical thinking, and so on. So this is really very current because a couple of years ago, equity and inclusion would not have featured as a transferable skill. But this is what companies are indicating as a key sort of skill as well, that they want to hire folks who are in tune with the concepts of equity and inclusion. So it's kind of meeting the moment. So imagine if you go through this Hop to the Future event and beyond, keeping these 8 competencies in mind as you prepare your resume and as you prepare for your interviews and your cover letters. Again, I'll provide the resources in a folder to you after this. I would upload this to the YouTube so you have this, this recording. So at this point, some of you, and I would be in the same exact boat, I recognize might be feeling a little bit nervous because perhaps there hasn't been an opportunity quite yet to develop skills in equity and inclusion. Or maybe in your resume currently as it stands, the leadership section is lacking enough bullet points. Perhaps for the roles that you're applying for, maybe that's not even a requirement. Most importantly, I want to emphasize is you do not have to have all these skills right now, right here, today in your resume, or even in the next 2 years. These are skills. I muted him. These are skills that you tend to you're going to be able to develop in your next job and then in your next. And like I said in the beginning, I'm still learning what these skills are for me and how they translate into the work I do. What I would like for you to do today, and as you prepare to go onto the internship job market, is just pay attention to the skills that you do have and the ones that you're developing. Pay attention now and sit, and reflect as you are thinking about preparing your materials. What brings you energy? What drains you? And I'll give you a solid example from my own experience in the next slide. What I'd rather you do, instead of feeling worried about the skills that you don't have, is to be able to identify the strengths that you do possess and find a way to effectively articulate that in your professional narrative, in your conversations with other people. Okay. So I just want to, give an example, a personal example in this next slide. Don't be scared on the words on the slide. I'm going to walk through it like as if I'm narrating it. But when I look back on my PhD student experience and I think back to what I did in a day or a week, I did a couple of things over and over again and became better and better at it. So for example, I would spend my day reading, doing literature search, researching. Basically, I became an expert, you all are, at information gathering. Okay. Then I would use that information, ideate, hypothesize, experiments, outline different outcomes. Okay, if this doesn't work, then this might work. And then I should discuss this with my lab mates, postdocs, and staff folks. So I had that people interaction. I was able to discuss that. And then I would plan experiments, organize materials, Excel sheets, things to do. And then quite often in the lab, you can't order one reagent because it's too expensive. So you order another one, which is lower budget. So you work within a budget constraint. And then you have to share animals, reagents. You might find this in your own experience with others, maybe not so much your data scientists or machine learning folks here, but the lab folks will relate to this aspect that you're supposed to share all this with others. And sometimes people don't share it. So you're navigating difficult relationships with others. I organized my day. I would mess up, start my experiments, toss out my samples accidentally. So failure lessons are infused in that. I learned certain instruments. No one in the lab figured out a particular instrument. Fine, I'll just have to figure it out as a senior most student in the lab. And then you get better at it. You ask for help. You call tech support. You troubleshoot. I am sure, and if you can relate, you can share this in the chat as well. That this is all relatable experiences of just going through graduate school. And then what do? We take that data that we're generating. Sometimes there's no data to generate. Sometimes there's large amounts. And then I would present it to lab in lab meeting every Friday, no matter which Friday it was. We all had to present in a round robin fashion, and then defend it because people would just want to question it. So we learn to defend. We learn to take feedback. Learn to reject. We learn to negotiate and sell our ideas. And then during the course of this, you may discover something new. You may innovate, you may fail, you start over, you may cry, you may get frustrated. But there are all these different lessons to be learned through the experience of a graduate student. At the end of my sort of lab day, I would actually also do student organization work, like host events, do mentorship programs, work within the hours I had in a day, get burnt out, cry, really be like really feeling like overwhelmed, enjoyed certain aspects and didn't enjoy certain aspects. What I didn't realize at that moment, going through that whole experience, is I was building my transferable skills. When I was literature searching, I was very good at gathering information. When I was discussing with lab mates and teaching people, I was relationship building. When I had to work under strict constraints and tight deadlines, boss would say, write an abstract by tomorrow and send it for a conference. Then I had to whip it out, right? In the last minute. I tend to do that now. I've taken those lessons and I do that now to send information to my boss. And I used creativity. When I did student org stuff, I was in a leadership sort of position. I was honing those skills. Again, there was student organization leadership. Now in this role, I have developed that leadership and still developing even more. So this is what I want you to sort of take out of this message, is the reflection of what you did. And when you do certain things, there are certain outcomes. And when you write a resume, you're highlighting these outcomes. So in my case, maybe my research work yielded an award or two, a paper, maybe something like that, that I really, put forth as the main accomplishment of my PhD. But what I forgot to do is when I was doing the extracurricular activities, like maybe public speaking, performing, hosting an event or something, these were also an opportunity for me to hone my transferable skills that I now utilize in this job. So what my internal compass was telling me, as a combination of my scientific research and the extracurricular activities, is that I liked freedom, creativity. I love doing experiments. I like experimenting. I love data analysis and new skills. But I did not like, maybe I sense later on my personal values didn't match with like academic culture. Maybe I didn't like working on the weekends because I became a mom. I couldn't find the impact that I wanted to find when I first joined academia. Things changed, things evolved. What I did realize through those entire experiences, if I take a 30,000 zoomed out view of my collective graduate experience, I realize I'm creative, I like helping others, I like relationship building in people, I like hosting, organizing, I have great ideas, and I'm comfortable and I'm comfortable being open. If I and you take the parts of what you love in research and the stuff that you enjoy doing, maybe outside of research as well, what you realize is that who you are is multifaceted. So having that knowledge not only gives you direction for exploring different career paths. For me, I landed on this career path in consulting, but helped me identify what those translational skills were. So what I do now has a lot to do with my graduate student experience. And a lot of people that we interview for our career panels will say the same things. Right now, if my boss says, tomorrow I need to send something to provost, send me this document or report, it's akin and very familiar to me as I did in grad school. I'm able to sit in like meetings and defend our data and plans because I've done that in lab meetings. And then same thing with the vision, plan, and executing of experiments, the same approach. One of PHutures' grad interns is here in the call today, and I had told them the other day in preparation for Hop to the Future, let's act like we were labeling our tubes and getting prepared for a big experiment, because let's just lay everything out, organize ourselves, and then execute later. And it was really like a flashback, because that's how I used to prepare for these large experiments. Same way I'm preparing for these large events, prepping mentally and physically into all this. So let me just check the chat box. Yeah. So there's a message, and I'd like to address that message, is that academic culture sometimes makes you feel that you're not good enough. So that's exactly my point of this conversation. Is that's exactly what I thought when I was in grad school, all up to my 4th year of my postdoc. It took me 9 years to even like sit down and reflect upon what I've done. And when you do that, you start to think about all these different small everyday tasks that you do, you have way more than what your academic experience is telling you have. So I just want to assure you that you can extract out from your experiences good things that our employers will value. Perhaps my creativity and outgoing nature and extracurricular activities was not something of value in my postdoc, because you had to, sort of put your head down and just do your postdoc work. But in this current job, it's very valued. The creativity and innovation and the ideas is what's, people are appreciating, and that's what people are validating. So I just want to show you that when you go into these different positions, it will come in handy, and I'm 100% proof of those skills coming in handy later on when I didn't realize how it would early on. So I know it feels like you're not good enough, but you're in a PhD program. You're super smart. You're super valued for what you bring to the table. So, I went off tangent a little bit about my personal story, but I'll come back to what we're talking about now. I feel a large part of identifying these skills really begins with taking stock of your PhD journey thus far. What questions you can ask yourself might look something like this. What do you do on a daily basis, inside and outside of research? Forget about R, Python, and figuring out these like large scale, like experimental duties. What are you doing when you're doing your research? What are these skills that fall into these different transferable categories, like critical thinking, communication? Start thinking about what you do from a skills perspective and an outcomes perspective. Think about what you enjoy doing. What do you dislike? Okay. Actually, do you speak multiple languages? Because that's a value that you can add on your resume that not many people can add. And that kind of falls into the equity and inclusion sort of bracket. Maybe you're a world traveler. You've traveled to 340, I don't know how many countries, 65 countries or something. That speaks to you, as you travel, people know that, it sort of expands your worldview. Maybe you can portray that. What that says to you as the employer is reading it is, this person might get along with diverse folks. I don't know, just extracting from your experiences. Don't discount who you are as a person and what you do in your extracurricular outside of lab as well when you're trying to articulate these transferable skills. I will send you a list to ponder. Again, I have a list of different skills you can think about. You can work on it on your own time. But for today, I just wanted to focus on 3 sort of skills that were lower ranked, and then try to see if you can extract out from them how you might already have that. So let's start with this one, which is communication. There was a question from the registered folks here who said, how do I sell skills like good communicator when I don't have poster presentations or conferences to back it up? So my question back to you is, let's start with the definition of communication. When I send you the NACE definition, it says clearly and effectively exchange information, ideas, facts, and perspectives with persons inside and outside of your organization. Do we do that as PhDs? 100% yes. Did you teach? Did you TA, mentor? Did you demo an instrument to an undergrad and then they learned it? Are you on a student committee? On a weekly basis, how often do you present your lab and your collaborators? Did you ever pitch an idea to your PI that now became a part of your project? Remember, you are communicating your research in your entire dissertation. So communication can take both forms, oral, written, and different experiences can convey communication. You don't have to think of it traditionally as poster presentations or conferences. Does that does that help? I'm just taking a look at the comments in the chat. Yeah, absolutely. Martha says, even as an older grad student, we are so fundamental to onboarding new students. That's communication all the way. Absolutely. So we don't have to have conferences and presentations to back it up, and many people don't. There are other things that you can portray in your resume with a clever use of words. So relationship building and people skills. And I'll add another question that was in the registration, which was how to make sure I'm ready to be, how to make sure I can communicate that I'm ready to be part of a team. And how do I do that nicely in a resume? Again, anytime you talk to people and have sort of interaction with different people from different sections, your PI to an undergrad, you're building those relationship skills and the people skills, right? You collaborated with members, sat in a committee. Maybe you worked at a restaurant before and you were the front host of the restaurant. And this is a real example from a student. That's client facing skills, that's people skills that you build that will come in handy for your next job in combination with your skills from your PhD, that are your technical skills. Maybe you were part of graduate consulting club and worked on a pro bono consulting project together with people. That's your relationship and building skills. So go back to the definition of relationship building and people skills, which is build and maintain collaborative relationships to work effectively towards a common goal while appreciating diverse viewpoints and shared responsibilities. Those are labs for most people. Even with the engineering folks, you're working together to sort of build different components of different machines and instruments as well. And then finally, and I'll just gloss over this, creativity and innovation. Maybe COVID impacted the way you do research, right? And impacted the resources. Labs didn't have reagents. So what did people do? How did you adapt? You can tell that story in your resume. Maybe you were teaching and you had to pivot to online teaching. What did you do? That's sort of being innovative. Perhaps there was some inequitable thing going on in the department. Maybe the number of underrepresented minority professors or postdocs was low, and you proposed a new idea or policy that changed the way the department functions. Our students do that all the time, and I see this in the resumes. Maybe you were the first person in the group to use a piece of technology. I remember when I was working on the microRNAs in 2014, that time we were trying to analyze large data sets of microRNAs, and no one knew how to use the Ingenuity pathway analysis tool, which was like a gene sort of expression, and you analyze a lot of genes, basically that kind of tool. And I was the first to use it and taught it to everyone else. And I remember stating that on my resume, that same point. I made that point in my resume, first to learn this instrument and teach it to staff scientists and PIs in the lab. You can be creative in the way you portray what you did. So at this part, identifying your career skills in part lies in ourselves, right? Assessing, reflecting, but also in part lies in strategizing and understanding who your audience is. And in this case, it's the employer. And here, different career industries might value different skills. Perhaps in consulting, and not perhaps, for sure, in consulting, what's valuable is solving problems and communication and people-facing client skills. Maybe in academic research, it's technical, analytical skills and collaboration. The way you show that you're the right candidate for those particular jobs in your resume and in your conversations with these recruiters in the near future is focusing on the skills that are important to that recruiter, to that job, and to that industry. What I mean by that is, oftentimes I'll see a resume that's a consulting focused resume that has all the details of their day-to-day research, like worked on this nano electrode, used Python to study this, or studied fluorescence microscopy, cell culture, flow cytometry. That has nothing to do with the consulting field, right? So that's not what we want to do, because it's not going to mean anything to consultants or to the recruiters who are recruiting for consulting. We want to flip it, and we want to be able to focus on the points that are important to the consulting world. In my case, I had to contract down a lot of my research skills and contract and expand up my extracurricular activities when I was applying to these positions that I'm in right now. So there's strategy involved in demonstrating that. If different careers have different needs, I would first gather the knowledge, much like you would do a literature search, on what the heck these folks are looking for in the first place. Maybe you can frame your question as you're trying to understand what the employer wants. How might I be a successful consultant? Or how might I be an engineer at Google? What skills would make me successful as an engineer at Apple? What do industry researchers at these companies do on a daily basis? So this is why I think we harp on, we talk so quite often on talking to people, doing informational interviews, going to career panels. So you get a sense and understanding of what these guys do on a day-to-day basis and how you might be able to do the same thing. For example, maybe a core portion of what they do at in Apple is problem solving, working in teams, and being analytical. In that case, you already have those skills because that's what you do as well in your PhD and your postdoc. So talk to those who work there, understand what the industry wants, and how do you understand what the industry wants if you don't have an opportunity to talk to anyone? If the clues are in the job description, and you'll hear me say this, and you'll probably get tired of me saying this if you come to the other sessions, is you start with the job description. You want to be able to deconstruct the job description to understand who they're looking for and what sort of their hiring needs are, and then work backwards from there. I'll give an example right now. If you're looking passively, maybe in your second year or third year, and you're not looking for positions right now, look at job descriptions, maybe on your LinkedIn, and start saving them. Because eventually what you're going to be able to do is mirror the language in the job description in your resume. So start saving job descriptions if you're early on in your career. Now, one of the companies that's likely coming, we're still doing recruiting. Today is the last day for companies to let us know if they're interested in coming to this event, is one of the companies that's coming is Guidehouse, which is a consulting firm, right? And they have a job description that they've shared on their website that I want to pull out for you guys so we can work through the example of how I would determine what the transferable skills are. So in this consultant at Guidehouse, I'll skip through all the fluff. They say consultants are responsible for the day-to-day leading of work streams and have frequent interactions with clients. Your specific responsibilities include analyzing scientific clinical information to discern the business implications, looking at emerging trends, conducting research interviews with clinicians, managing and mentoring junior staff, preparing and delivering presentations to clients. And they go on to say that senior consultants will continue to deepen their knowledge of the field of healthcare, which means you are not expected to know this as you go in. And as senior consultants, they will hone their project management skills. That means you're not expected to know this already. So if I were to look at the job description, I do this every single time. I'll highlight out the skills that they say are important. So what did they say is important? Frequent interaction with clients, analyzing scientific skills. Okay, let's continue. There's more of in the job description. Ability to work independently, use data to guide clients, data collection, written and oral communication skills are very important. Are these sort of skills sort of looking familiar to you? Excellent attention to detail, collaborative team player. So how do you articulate this in a resume, right? So you can see that the transferable skills are right there in plain sight in the job description. Communication skills, collaboration, independent worker, attention to detail, team player. So now, when I sit down to write my resume, I keep these transferable skills in my mind. And if I'm articulating my work as a postdoc person at the NIH, for example, I'm going to be very careful in the kinds of verbiage I use in my bullet points of my resume. For example, this is an example from someone who was a BCG consultant, says, prepared weekly one-on-one meetings with the director of NIDA to analyze data and strategically refine hypotheses. So you see, we make a connection from the job description to what we do on a day-to-day basis. There has to be intention in our resume bullet points. You may be tempted to add everything you ever did. But the question is it relevant to the job? Is it relevant to the employer? Do they even care that you used a piece of equipment to look into the cells. Probably not. But more on this in the resume workshop next week. Another way section in this person's resume is led a team of 25 people to achieve customer retention and sales for 5 consecutive months. Why are they saying they led a team? Because as a consultant, they're going to have to lead a team. And why are they mentioning customer retention? Because they're going to be in a client-facing role as a consultant. So the author is very intentional and very thoughtfully including these bullet points for this particular consulting role. So how do you articulate this in the cover letter? So in the cover letter, you take it a next step further. You expand on the bullet points from your resume, right? You pick 2 or 3 top skills that are absolutely important. In this case, this person says communication skill. They want to highlight communication skills in their cover letter. So they're explaining how, as a teaching assistant, they develop communication skills. So he says, I was a teaching assistant in chemistry department. 3 of my students hired me to personally tutor them. And then those 3 students were later accepted into medical school. And pay attention to the last line, which is, my experience as a teaching assistant taught me to adapt to the needs of various students and personally tailor my communication to their circumstances. Why is he mentioning this? Because that's exactly what he's going to have to do as a consultant. Adapt to the needs of the client, substitute students to client, and then tailor your communication to the client's needs. Everything is intentional in the cover letter, and it really draws parallels. If I were to overlay the job description of a consultant on this person's resume and cover letter, there'd be quite a bit of a match and quite a bit of a coherence between the two. And that's exactly what you want to do. How do you articulate this in an interview, though? So again, it's the trifecta: resume, cover letter, interview. How do you articulate this in interview? When I see the job description, I can imagine what kinds of questions they're going to test me on. They may say, tell me about yourself. And if it's a consultant position at Guidehouse and you have 15 minutes and Hop to the Future event to talk to an interviewer, and they say, tell me about yourself, you're not going to be talking about the details of your research work. You're going to be talking about these transferable skills that are essential as a consultant. Perhaps you tell them about how you discovered something novel, how you were resourceful, how you use something within a budget, how you worked with other people. Maybe your boss gave you a tight deadline. You want to craft your narrative as it pertains to the transferable skill that the employer desires. They may ask you that, like, we'll practice this eventually as well. We have drop-in sessions every Friday, so feel free to come practice all these questions. Tell me about a time you worked in a team setting. Why? Because teamwork is important to consulting. Can you recall a time you had to meet a deadline but were not able to? What was the outcome? Or maybe the question is going to be, tell me about a time you had to convince others about an idea you had. How did it go? Or perhaps, with the consulting, there's going to be the case, not often, but quite often, there's a case interview. Now, for those of you who are interested in consulting, for example, one of the teams that is coming, actually 2 of the teams that are coming are from Booz Allen Hamilton. They're PhD consultants. And I had an interview with them when I was a postdoc and been in touch with them over the last few years and reached back out to them to invite them to come to this. I had a full-blown interview with them and no case interviews. I can tell you that they don't do case interviews. So that's why it was appealing to me. And so I think just putting in a sort of a plug for maintaining relationships over time, even through this event, when you talk to a recruiter, maybe nothing pans out in the next 3 months, but something might pan out when you stay connected and you maintain that relationship with the recruiter. But again, I went off tangent. I just wanted to bring that point in. We will talk about this later when we talk about how to network with the recruiters at the event. So now, this is where I need your engagement because this is the last section. I wanted to ask you to look at this job description for a computational biologist that one of the company's flagship Pioneering is coming, and they have provided this job. What do you discern from this job description? Maybe you can start quickly putting it in the chat box as the transferable skills that are required for this role based on everything that I've shared today. And so 2 pages. So if you can start sharing, it doesn't matter what your field is. You can be an engineer, it doesn't matter. But being able to pick out transferable skills from any job is a skill. So what do you think this computational biologist role is going to involve? Anything in the chat that you want to add that you figured out in the first few sentences?
Data analysis.
Yeah.
Collaboration.
Yes. I'm going to go to the next slide so you have more information. Okay, because their job description continues. Yeah. Problem solving. What else? Okay. Okay, so if you hadn't figured out how to look for transferable skills, I just want to again put a stamp on it. Most of the time, this information is in the job description. We can talk about later if it's a terrible job description, what do you do? But you're right, you've gotten all the points right. So I would say, use computational tools, ability to work on different projects, collaboration, teamwork, just as you said, be a fast learner and strong scientific computational aptitude. And how I would articulate this in my resume and cover letter is basically similar. I'll formulate resume bullet points based on this. Develop computational and machine learning tools to generate insights, blah, 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 blah. I'll mirror the language in the job description. One elevator pitch competition by explaining research to the general public in 1 minute, because this postdoc who is now works at Flagship Pioneering, who was part of Hop to the Future last year, won this elevator pitch. But what that tells me about them when I'm reading the resume is that they're a great communicator. So remember, this is the definition of translational skills. And then they say mentor, junior lab members, so on and so forth. There are better ways in which we can adapt that to the job at hand. So what kind of interview questions would you ask the candidate? Maybe they could ask you, because this is a little bit technically heavy, so they may ask you about how you use R to analyze large data sets, walk me through your scientific process. Maybe because they had talked a little bit about deadlines and there was another bullet point about errors. Maybe they may ask you about how you've experienced failure. Or maybe they'll directly ask you, what are the strengths that you bring to the table? So work backwards from the job description, have notes. I had a notebook. I wrote down all this stuff. I crafted my own projected interview questions, and I practiced those interview questions. And that is a solid preparation for that moment that opportunity comes knocking. So lastly, I just want to put it all together. Again, like I'll send you a whole bunch of resources and articles, but putting it all together, the employers are looking for PhDs. So if you spend enough time on Twitter where everyone's talking about the PhD is not worth it, you're at that moment where you're almost finishing or going through it. I just want to sort of showcase that while there are so many sort of issues in our PhDs that we are all working collectively to resolve, at the end of the day, when the employers are thinking about it, they are looking for you. You have these desirable skills and then some. And remember that you can build others in time. Between now and the next week, when we're trying to announce these companies, organizations, maybe there's a chance to go to a networking session, have a sit down and list what you have as skills, what you enjoy, and what you can build over time. Someone asked, how do I identify the keywords and what to include in my job materials? Start with the job description and start talking to people, have conversations, go and meet these PhDs that are coming, go and meet with them on LinkedIn. But the important part is we already do this. We are good researchers. So just research this stuff. Deconstruct the job posting, build your resume around this. Again, we have a resume workshop next week. Build your cover letter around this. The following week is the cover letter workshop. And then after that, prepare for your interviews around this notion. Again, we'll dive into that more. So I wanted to quickly finish on time to see if there were any questions that you didn't have. But that's the PowerPoint presentation portion. Again, I'll share everything with you. But if you have any questions about what I just shared, please let me know.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So for me, it's a little bit hard to kind of pinpoint which jobs I should be applying to. Like, I guess maybe I'm not using the correct filters to find them, but when I go on LinkedIn and I write computational biologist, I either find people that are looking for somebody who has a master's degree or somebody who like already completed a postdoc. So I'm kind of in between those two categories. So I mean, what would be, I guess, I don't know if you maybe have another specific section for this, but any advice on really how to better research and get some statistics about, jobs that, one would be eligible for, or just statistics of different categories of jobs would be great.
Yeah, so I'll start with the first point that you made, which was what do I search for in LinkedIn? And one of the searches was computational biologist. The thing with LinkedIn is it's all keyword based. So we would start with what you do. You're a biophysics student and you study a particular topic. Put a combination of keywords in biophysics put plus PhD, and then anything that touches with biophysics and PhD comes through. Put biologist plus biophysics or biologist plus PhD, and all roles that are PhD oriented that fall into the computational aspect will come through. So I would suggest playing around with different kinds of keywords that are your strengths. So give me an example, Alma, of a particular skill that you want to take into your next job. Like
Python,
maybe something you're good at right now. Okay.
C++, machine learning, data analysis.
Yeah. Put all those in as a combination, but add a plus PhD to it and see what shows up. What will start happening with LinkedIn is start learning your searches and it'll start pushing jobs towards you that are fall under all those broad categories. So that's one way to do it. Another way to do it is maybe you don't want to go into the job section of LinkedIn and just search for keywords. Maybe you have an idea, or maybe you want to search from people. So I would say go to the Johns Hopkins page or the search bar on LinkedIn, say PhD biophysics, and then see who are the people that show up. In the very first headline, you should see people who work in different industries, right? Suppose it says, aha, here's a PhD who works at Genentech, and you've never heard of Genentech before. Maybe it's the first time you're hearing of Genentech. Click on Genentech and follow the trail. And we can talk about this later. Also, Alma, I can show you and demonstrate. Follow the trail. You'll see a lot of different pages on LinkedIn show up that are associated with Genentech, and will spit out people with different titles and roles. When you gather that information and you collect that knowledge, you can use that as your keyword search. I think the problem we face as pages, you're right, there's a lack of awareness of what's out there. I'd say browse, put a combination of keywords and follow the trails of people who've done this before. I will show you how to do this in a LinkedIn demo or something. Maybe that's a component that I cover during the networking talk in a few weeks. I'll do that. So that was part one of your conversation. And thank you, Prasad. Prasad's sharing some resources on our YouTube channel as well. Anything that's been recorded before is on YouTube. Alma, what was the second half of your question? I'm trying to address the other questions as well.
I think it was really more just kind of one big question. I just kind of really talked a little much, but thank you. That's really helpful. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, and we can demonstrate together. I'll show you different pathways to follow within the LinkedIn sphere. But LinkedIn's not the only not the only place to go. Now, when you see the companies that are coming, the roles that they're applying for, you'll get a little bit more knowledge as well. Oh, you talked about masters versus postdoc. I would say also don't hesitate to apply to jobs that say masters, because I've done this before. There is that chance when you go through the process or you get FaceTime with the recruiters, that there is a chance that your title might be changed and your salary might change. Maybe it's being advertised as masters, but there's an opening on the team that for PhDs as well. I'd say if you fit the role and the descriptions, just because it doesn't say PhD and says only masters doesn't mean, and this is just up to you to do, I've done it before, doesn't mean you shouldn't sort of apply, especially if it's such a great job and such a great fit to what you want to do. Apply. There's always a chance to negotiate a better title and negotiate salary. Previous postdocs have done this and it's worked out. One thing I would say is a lot of jobs say masters with a few years experience. Many places count PhDs as experience. Correct. Yeah. You can substitute experience from the masters with your PhD, which is again a bonus. If you are looking for a job somewhat outside of your PhD field, what's a good way or example to communicate that you really are a fast and capable learner and willing to adjust to a new field without just saying fast learner, which I'm sure everyone does. Yeah, so think of a time during your PhD that you had to figure something out real quickly and that you had to pivot into really just learning it. So for example, there was a student whose big machine broke down. It was like a $50,000 machine broke down, and they bought a $300 or $400 machine from Alibaba and got it shipped to the university and used that machine instead of the $50,000 machine on a very short timeline. And that was a bullet point in the resume. They explained it very succinctly, and I helped them craft it. I will find it for you, but it's an example where you may have to have had to pivot really fast and had to innovate really quickly, but you did it. You can figure it out. In my case, I would say something like um, um, suppose I'm in immunology and I'm trying to move into QC, like qualitative control. I will draw parallels from anything new that I learned in immunology that showcases that I learned it quite quickly. And I will let the reader deduce, which we're always doing when I'm reading resumes, is deducing what does it say about the candidate. It'll come through as fast learner. So my point is, give a solid example of a time you did that in the past. Don't just say fast learner, which is a buzzword, but provide an example like fast learner as evidenced by, and then explain the situation to them in your resume bullet point. We will talk about this more in the resume bullet point next week when we talk about resumes. That way I'll teach you how to sort of expand on that fast learner bit and add little components that makes it more well-rounded. Another question is how not to feel intimidated by the skills job list compared to what you know. For example, I'm an engineer by trade, but I'm collaborating with a neuroscience lab. I have some neuroscience experience, but I would feel intimidated if the job required high familiarity, even if I may have it by their definition. Yeah, so you don't have to be 100% matched. If it's familiarity, you have familiarity because you're sort of had tangential and adjacent experience to that. Unless a job says neuroscience, direct neuroscience experience preferred, you have a good chance. Unless the job says that they absolutely want a neuroscientist in that role, you have a great chance, because what they'll view you as is this diverse, out of the box engineer who can bring a sort of expertise into the neuroscience world. So think of what you bring to the table as an asset, as a value proposition to neuroscience. So first things first, you don't have to be 100% match. When I applied to the Futures job, I think I was like 50 or 55% match to the job description because I've never done it before. But when I came to the interview, I was able to portray, as you were asking earlier about the fast learner, in the interview, I was able to portray that I may not know some things now, but I shall certainly pick it up as virtue of having done it before in my PhD, in my experiments, and so on and so forth. So don't be intimidated by jobs that feel sort of out of stretch. As long as you follow like the core components and have sort of the core requirements of the job and meet their basic requirements, apply. Just apply. You just never know what they see in you when they're reading your resume. As long as it's a well-crafted, nice resume with a great cover letter, you can sell that. How to draw the line between over-glorifying a simple task, which we don't want to do, and actually highlighting important skills we have through useful examples. It depends. It really depends, I would say, on the job description. Maybe to the job that you're applying for some reason, Microsoft Office is a skill that they absolutely want the candidate to have. In that case, what might seem as a simple task to us, Microsoft Office, I will put that in the resume. So all I'm doing is taking the job description on one hand and my resume on the other, and aligning them together and seeing if I'm having coherence between the two. So I would say it depends on the job description. Dissecting out what is important versus what is a simple task will really depend on what the job is asking. Maybe Microsoft Excel, the PhD boss really want someone to know that, and that's okay. You can add that into your skill sets as well. And maybe in other cases, it's too basic and they want only you to talk about Python and R. In that case, adapt to the job description. You'll hear me say this again later on. Tailored resume. So you're tailoring and crafting your narrative in your resume, cover letter, and interview to the job. So that means you're leaving out excess information. Suppose you're interviewing with Guidehouse one day, but you're interviewing with McKinsey in another day. Your resume is going to change and adapt to the needs of Guidehouse and the need of McKinsey, although they're both consulting firms. Same thing with Google and Apple. You both have data science jobs. They both sort of want sort of the same skill set, but according to the job description, there are slight differences. So you'll be like adapting your resume and tailoring it to those particular jobs.